Good afternoon. This is Mr. Chris from Hartford Glen, and I'm glad you could be out here with me today. I've got a nice little fire started, and I wanted to share one of the books with you that I use for my instruction out here at Hartford Glen. The name of the book is A River Ran Wild. It's by Lynne. It's one of my favorites. And as I read this book, one thing I would like you to focus on are the things that people are doing that are good for the environment, plus some of the things that people that are doing that are not so good for the environment. That's it. So get ready, make yourselves comfortable, enjoy my fire, and we will begin. A River Ran Wild by Lynne. One of the things that I love about these books, this particular book, are all the illustrations that frame each page in the book. Long ago, a river ran wild through a land of towering forests. Bears, moose, and herds of deer, hawks, and owls all made their homes in the peaceful river valley. Geese paused on their long migration and rested on its banks. Beavers, turtles, and schools of fish swam in its clear waters. One day, a group of native people searching for a place to settle came upon the river valley. From atop the highest mountain, known today as Mount Wachusett, they saw the river nestled in its valley, a silver sliver in the sun. They came down from the mountains, and at the river's edge, they knelt to quench their thirst with its clear water. Pebbles shone up from the bottom. "Let us settle by this river," said the chief of the native people. He named the river Nashaway, river with the pebbled bottom. By the Nashaway, Chief Wiewa's people built a village. They gathered cattails from the riverbanks to thatch their dwellings. In the forest, they set fires to clear brush from the forest floor. In these clearings, they planted corn and squash for eating. They made arrows for hunting and canoes for river travel. When the Indians hunted in the forest or caught salmon in the river, they killed only what they needed for themselves, for food and clothing. They asked all the forest creatures that they killed to please forgive them. The Nashwa people saw a rhythm in their lives and in the seasons. The river, land, and forests provided what they needed. The Nashwa had lived for generations by the clear, clean flowing river when one day a pale-skinned trader came with a boatload full of treasures. He brought shiny metal knives, colored beads, and cooking kettles, mirrors, tools, and bolts of bright cloth. His wares seemed like magic. The Nashwa welcomed him, traded furs, and soon a trading post was built. In the many years that followed, the settlers' village and others like it grew, and the Nashaway became the Nashwa. The settlers worked together to clear the land by cutting down the forests, which they thought were full of danger, wilderness that they would conquer. They hunted wolves and beaver, killing much more than they needed. Extra pelts were sent to England in return for goods and money. The settlers built sawmills along the river, which the Nashwa's current powered. They built dams to make the mill ponds that were used to store the water. They cut down the towering forests and floated tree trunks down the river. The logs were cut up into lumber, which was used for building houses. The settlers built fences for their pastures, plowed the fields, and planted crops. They called the land their own and told the Indians not to trespass. Hunting land disappeared as settlers cleared the forest. Indian fishing rights vanished as the settlers claimed the river. The Indians' ways were disrupted and they began to fight the settlers. The wars raged for many years, but the Indians' bows and arrows were no match against the gunpowder, and so their settlers' rifles drove the Indians from the land. Through 100 years of fighting, the Nashawaw was a healthy river, sometimes dammed for grist and sawmills, but still flowing wild and free. Muskrats, fish, and turtles still swam from bank to bank. Deer still came to drink from the river, and owls, raccoons, and beaver fed there. At the start of the new century, an industrial revolution came to the Nashawaw's banks and waters. Many new machines were invented. Some spun thread from wool and cotton. Others wove the thread into cloth. Some machines turned wood to pulp, and others made the pulp into paper. Leftover pulp and dye and fiber was dumped into the Nashawaw River, whose swiftly flowing current washed away all the waste. These were times of much excitement, times of progress and invention. Factories along the Nashawaw River made new things of new materials. Telephones and radios and other things were made of plastics. Chemicals and plastic waste were also dumped into the river. Soon the Nashawaw's fish and wildlife grew sick from this pollution. The paper mills continued to pollute the Nashawaw's waters. Every day for many decades, pulp was dumped into the Nashawaw, and as the pulp clogged up the river, it began to run more slowly. As the pulp decomposed, bad smells welled up from the river. People who lived near the river smelled its stench and stayed away from it. Each day as the mills dyed paper red, green, blue, and yellow, the Nashawaw ran whatever color the paper was dyed. Soon, no fish lived in the river, no birds stopped on their migration, no one could see pebbles shining up through the murky water. The Nashawaw was dark and dirty. The Nashawaw was slowly dying. One night, Owiana, a descendant of Weawa, who still lived by the Nashawaw, had a dream so vivid that he awoke in wide-eyed wonder. In his dream, Chief Weawa's spirit returned to the river and saw it as it was now. Still and deadly. Chief Weawa mourned for the Nashaway, but where his tears fell upon the dirty waters, the waters were cleansed until the river once again flowed freely. The next morning, Owiana went to speak to his friend Marion. When he told her of his dream, she said, "I had this dream also." River with a pebbled bottom is the name Weawa gave it, but today no pebbles shine up through the Nashawaw's river's waters. Together, they decided something must be done. Marion traveled to each town along the Nashawaw. She spoke of the river's history and of her vision to restore it. No longer do we have a river. It's a stinking, smelly sewer. But it wasn't always this way. People listened and imagined a sparkling river full of fish. They imagined pebbles shining up through the clear waters. They signed petitions and sent letters. They protested the politicians and showed them jars of dirty water. They convinced the paper mills to build a plant to process the waste. They persuaded the factories to stop dumping. Finally, new laws were passed and the factories stopped polluting. Slowly, the Nashua's current began to clean its water. Year by year, the river carried away the dyes and fiber to the ocean. Marion and Oweana thanked the people who had helped to clean the Nashua. Through the meadows, towns, and cities, the Nashua once again flows freely. Paper pulp no longer clogs it. Chemicals no longer foul it. Now we walk along its banks and row upon its fragrant waters. We can set our boats upon it, and with its current, drift downstream. Once again, the river runs wild through a towering forest greenway. Red-tailed hawks and barred owls live here. Geese pause from their long migration and rest on the riverbanks. Deer come to drink from the river's waters. We too have settled by this river. Pebbles shine up through clear water. Nashua is what we call it, river with the pebbled bottom. So, did you notice anything that people were doing that was good for the environment and helped keep the river healthy? And did you notice anything that people were doing that wasn't so good for the environment and was not making the river very healthy at all, was causing problems? One of the things we do as stewards is we are always focusing on how we interact with the natural world around us. Now think about this. You understand that we as humans, we make mistakes. And often we make mistakes how we interact with the natural world around us. So think about this first. When we make mistakes with how we interact with the natural world, whose responsibility is it to try to fix those? And the answer is us, we the stewards. That's our job. If we discover we make mistakes, it's our job to try to make them better. That's what good stewards do. The goal is to do no harm, but from time to time we make mistakes and we need to go back and we need to try to make things better. So reflect on the story, think about the things people did that weren't so good for the environment and the things that they did do that helped the health of the river, and use those as examples to try to be a better steward. This is Mr. Chris. I hope you have a great day.